Michael, and this is Pen and Reel, where I will take a look at media issues not from the perspective of a fan or consumer, but as a writer and filmmaker. So one of the franchises that seems to consistently flounder is the Terminator. Ever since they attempted to make a comeback with Terminator 3, the Terminator movies have struggled to achieve success comparable to the original two. Each new movie attempted to reignite the series, but every time they came out with a new movie, there seemed to be something lacking, even up to the most recent film Dark Fate that saw the return of James Cameron. What was lacking from the four newer films that set the originals apart? What had even James Cameron forgotten about his older work? I say it's a case of lost identity. When you watch the original films, there's a very different feel to them. They're unique. Part of it comes from the style in the 80s as opposed to modern films. You can look at other franchises, such as Alien and Predator, for proof of that. But in my eyes, the ultimate difference between the first two Terminator films and the subsequent films is fear. In the first movie, Sarah Connor is terrified, on the run, barely ever able to stop moving. There is this constantly looming threat of the Terminator, a relentless killing machine whose sole purpose is to kill her. That is utterly terrifying, and is a consistent underlying tone of the whole movie, the looming threat of imminent death. It's not quite horror, but the suspense and consistent fear is absolutely crucial to the feel of the film. Arnold Schwarzenegger was not this strong man who intimidated his opponents. He was this unstoppable, unimaginable monster who tore through anything in his path and struck fear in the hearts of any and all who opposed him. So this second movie does lighten things up a bit with the introduction of John, but it also ratchets up the horror element with Sarah's dreams of Judgment Day and her ingrained fear of the Terminator. And what's more, the introduction of the T-1000 didn't simply serve to push the science fiction and excitement to new heights, it increased the terror exponentially. Where once you might stand a chance of blowing things away, now there isn't a gun that can properly damage the enemy. Where once you could crush it, now that will merely slow it down. There is nothing that will stop this insatiable slow march of death that wants nothing more than to kill you at all costs. It will stop at nothing. It will just keep coming, relentlessly, tirelessly, until it catches up to you and it does what it was designed to do. End your life, even if it means tearing you apart with its bare hands. Unfortunately, this seems to be lost on the future films. The characters certainly have some fear of the Terminators, but that isn't reflected in the movie itself. It gets less personal, less suspenseful, and more focused on action, excitement, and big set pieces. Dark Fate attempted to recapture what the first movies, and two movies did, and it succeeded in some areas, but fell short in others. It did manage to recapture the always on the run aspect that helped create the suspense in the first place. That sense that you can never stay still for too long. Unfortunately, it focused too heavily on the action that ensues and not enough of the reason for the suspense, that sense that death is ever imminent. The sense of horror at the literal walking death machine coming right for you is traded out for the action heroes who stubbornly refuse to give in, determined to win no matter what. That may have been the story they were going for, but that is where it lacks the uniqueness of the originals. It becomes just another action movie. So much of what makes the old films great is how personal they are. It isn't about the helicopter chases over the bridge, or prolonged battles in airplanes and while falling from the sky, or any sort of crazy set piece. Even the awesome scene with the molten metal at the end of Judgment Day served a very specific purpose within the story, making it more than just a cool set piece, but an essential development that anyone who's seen the film can instantly identify. These films weren't about spectacle, although they certainly contained it. They were about these individual characters first and foremost, and the story developed around them and through them. The later films seem to forget this, making the characters fit the story, losing all sense of weight and gravity. These first two films were about life on the run, and they were as much about death as they were life. They were about self-preservation. Skynet sent the Terminators back in time to kill Sarah and John for self-preservation. John sent Kyle and then the Terminator for self-preservation. The constant chase and our heroes fighting just to survive is again all about self-preservation. Certainly the future is at stake, but there are global consequences. But this is first and foremost a battle for life, quite literally against the forces of death. Terminators, hunter-killers. The battle against death and fight for self-preservation is essential. Which, when I think about it, all ties back into the horror aspect. When it is all about the individual, the fear is tangible, at the forefront. But when it becomes about saving the world, it just isn't the same. It's not as scary. I think this is because we have difficulty thinking about things in such a large scale, and so it doesn't connect as scary. For instance, what if I told you a story about someone breaking into a house, intent on killing the people inside? Such a tale could be easy to relate to. It would be easy to put yourself in the shoes of being afraid of someone breaking in. But then, what if I told you a story about 100 men marching through a city, shooting everyone in sight? That is a much more horrific scenario, but it seems far less likely. And it's just not as easy to put ourselves into that position. Similarly, in the real world, if we witness or hear of an individual death, it's far easier to be affected by that than to hear of a death toll in some faraway country, even if it is great in many people. There's something about large numbers and a large scale that makes it become less personal, a little more abstract, and thus more difficult for the average person to connect with emotionally. I think it's similar with movies and fear. A threat to the world is just not as frightening as a threat to the main character. The threat can ultimately be to the world, but it has to be about the individual character for us to empathize. So overall, though there are a few problems that persist, I think the primary issue is without a doubt a lack of fear in any of the newer movies. I could pick apart each of the sequels and list my problems on an individual basis, but that's not what I'm trying to achieve here. I truly believe that if the next Terminator movie made it more personal, smaller scale, and really drove home the dread and impending doom throughout, we could have a really good movie once again. Regardless of your enjoyment of the recent films, I think we all want to see that. A Terminator movie that has us on the edge of our seat. Yeah. A Terminator film that has us on the edge of our seats instead of trying to wow us with spectacle. So what do you think? Do you agree with my thought on fear being the primary thing missing from the movies? Would you like to see a dark Terminator movie again? One that has death always as a moment away? Or do you think I'm wrong? You would prefer a larger scale with more robots, more explosions, more spectacle? Are there any other crucial moments that I didn't mention? Are there any other crucial elements that I didn't mention? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on the matter. And until next time, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.